And they have had some meetings.
No. Well, you remember too.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the May 13th Maplewood City Council Workshop. City Manager Coleman, would you do our roll call for us, please?
Certainly, Mayor. Councilmember Neblett. Here. Councilmember Juniman. Here. Councilmember Knutson. Here. Mayor Abrams.
Here.
And Mr. Smith is on his way.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Moved by Neblett, seconded by Knutson. Approval of the agenda. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. We have no unfinished business tonight, and we have 4 new business items. Presentation on the cable television franchise ordinance, the NFP employee benefit update, the rush line update, and some training on the intranet. Mr. Folds, nice to see you here. I'm sure it's going to be scintillating training.
Oh, my.
Very glad about that.
Speak for yourself.
So it's always good. Training is always good. So let's start with the presentation on the cable television. Michael Folds, I see that that is you.
Mayor and Council, thank you. With me tonight is Mr. Bob Vos. Mr. Vos is the attorney with Kennedy and Graven. His expertise lies in negotiating agreements just like this. He's negotiated agreements like this for many other metro area cities, and so he is truly the expert on the document. It's been a pleasure to have him with. Tonight we're going to give a presentation on the overall document. We're going to touch on some of the key points that we laid out, that staff laid out, the council approved in the needs assessment document, approved in 2018. So we'll use that as kind of a framework for this discussion. Tonight, we're not asking you to take any action at the workshop, obviously, but we are turning around and bringing the agreement back before you as part of the regular meeting. So if you have any questions, please do ask. That's what this is for. And with that, I'll ask Mr. Vos to come up and give an overview of the agreement.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, Council, Bob Vos, Kennedy and Graven. I'm glad to be back. I see a couple of new faces. Nice to see you. So I'm going to give you an overview of the franchise. It's a franchise agreement that we've been negotiating now. At least one staff person has said it seems like for years and years, and I think that's getting close to being correct. It's been a while that we've been at these negotiations, and I'm pleased, and I think Michael is pleased, that we're able to recommend approval of what we've negotiated. And there's sort of 2 reasons, and let me start there. 2 reasons that we're recommending approval of the document that's in front of you and will be in front of you tonight later. The first reason is the obvious. You set out at the beginning of this process, the council set out what's called a needs assessment in the cable franchise renewal world. And basically a document that set forth the council's priorities, your view of your community's priorities for cable franchising, cable franchise issues, and that document really served as our roadmap. That was our sheet that we were going to grade ourselves against from the beginning when we got to the end of the negotiations. And I think I feel very good, and staff feels very good about how we've done against those priorities. I will say that a cable franchise, although it's an ordinance, you actually adopt it as an ordinance, it is a negotiated contract. It's both a contract and an ordinance, and because it's negotiated and it's negotiable, you're not always going to get everything that you sought, and that's true here. We didn't get everything that the city wanted, but we feel very good about where we came out grading ourselves against your needs assessment report. The other reason is maybe not as important, but it's certainly not irrelevant, and that is because I do this kind of work for a number of communities around this metropolitan market. I'm aware of how other cable franchise renewals have come out or are going to come out, appear to be headed to come out with Comcast. And sort of grading us against those other negotiations, this community has done quite well. And just to give you a flavor for sort of the communities I'm thinking about, communities that have done renewals recently that I'm familiar with, I'm talking about Bloomington that renewed its franchise just a couple of years ago, City of Eagan that also renewed very recently, a city of mine that I handled negotiations for, Burnsville, that literally just in the last 2 months completed negotiations. And then other communities that are in the process, Vadnais Heights, Anoka, Ramsey, Champlain, Andover, all of those negotiations. I see where the plane is going to land in those negotiations and feel that we've done quite well measuring ourselves against those. So we recommend approval. Let me go through. Staff has done a nice job in your packet, relatively short, concise memo hitting the high points. As the memo in your packet at E1, the attachment there, indicates, this is your needs assessment summarized. These are the priorities that you, the council, identified as your priorities in negotiations, and this is how we've come out on each of those. I will, Mayor, if it's okay with you, just move through these quickly.
Please.
And then leave a little bit of time for you to ask questions about them at the end. So the first, under subscriber experience, the council wanted to be sure that you continue into the future to have the right, to have the power under your contract to enforce customer service, see that customers are dealt with properly. As a general matter, we've made sure in this proposed contract that Comcast will have to comply with fairly extensive federal regulations. The FCC has customer service standards. The company will have to comply with all of those. There are measuring sticks built into the contract for us to actually evaluate the company against those federal standards. But we've gone beyond that. We have more than just that. There are a number of enhancements over what the FCC would require, and I guess the most important one, the catch-all one that I will highlight for you, it's at section 14.1 of the document if you wanted to look at it. You have the right, the city will have a right in the future to, in the future, create new requirements, new regulations for customer service. So even though we are contracting today, entering a cable franchise today, this city will have the right in the future, if there are customer service problems, you will have the right to adopt and then enforce new regulations regarding customer service in the future. Second point is about rates. I've said to the council in the past, and I'll reiterate now, the federal government, for better or worse, probably worse from our perspective, has preempted largely local control over cable rates. We have little to no authority over cable rates. We do though, in this document, in this contract, address cable rates in a couple of important ways. First of all, to the extent the company changes rates, and of course that's always an increase in rates, they will continue to be required to give notice to customers of those rates increases in advance so that people can make informed decisions about whether they want to continue on with the company. Secondly, they will not be allowed to discriminate in terms of their rates. They will not be able to charge different rates between various neighborhoods in your community, nor will they be able to charge different rates in this community as compared to other communities in this metropolitan area. So they will have to charge uniform rates in your city and as compared to other cities. You wanted to have a senior discount, and that's understandable. It's understandable to want to look out for folks that may need some help. The company was quite adamant, and they've been adamant in all of the other renewals that I'm familiar with, bar one, against giving that senior discount, simply because that is viewed by the company as being a form of rate regulation, a form of local control over the rates, and as I've said, that's federally preempted. And so they would not agree to that. They do, though, point us to, as the staff report indicates, they're voluntary. It's their program. It's not one that the government has imposed on them. Their program, Internet Essentials, and just to summarize that, I don't want to be a spokesperson for the company, but I'll summarize the high points of that program. If a person is eligible for the school lunch program, that their children are, or a vet of a military engagement, or a senior, in other words, there's an age qualifier, or eligible for housing assistance, that person or that family is able to get a fairly robust internet service of 15 megabit internet service for under $10 a month. So it's a good program for those that qualify for that. Universal service, another thing that was important to the council, and that universal service, to summarize it greatly, is a program that you've had under the prior contract, in the past you've had, that allowed folks to get free community programming channels. So a person that didn't want to pay, didn't want to subscribe for Comcast service could still get the community programming channels for free without having to subscribe to the service. You wanted to continue that program, and the company has not accepted that in many, maybe any other communities, but they did accept the continuation of that program for those that already have it. In other words, they're not going to continue to make it available, but would continue to let people that have that service continue to enjoy it. Lastly, I've already talked about FCC standards in relation to the quality of the cable system, the quality of the technology that's being provided to you. You currently in this community have a 750 megahertz system. That is state-of-the-art. That's a very robust cable system. It's got to be able to offer at least 200 channels. It will continue to have to do that. But then beyond that, the company is agreeing to both comply with existing current FCC standards regarding cable systems, but also any changes, any augmentations to those federal requirements in the future the company will be bound to comply with. Moving then to infrastructure, the title infrastructure, INET connectivity, that refers to a thing that we've had here, a right we've had here in the past to have some fiber connections to government facilities, primarily to be used for originating, sending out live programming, community programming on your PEG channels, but we've also used it for some other purposes. We will continue to have that right here at City Hall, most importantly, and then at a couple of schools. To the extent there are a couple of other facilities where we wanted to have that right, a fire station and the nature center, we will have that right. We'll have to pay for it now. We had not had to do that in the past, but we've negotiated some preferential rates, some rates that are below market rates to provide that fiber connection to those sites should the council elect to do that. Interconnectivity now not within your community. I just spoke to interconnectivity, INET connectivity within your community. INET connectivity, internet connectivity between this community and other communities. We wanted to maintain that. We're going to do that. The reason that's important, as I understand it, Michael will correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the reasons that is important to us is that we get some technical support from the city of Roseville. We contract to receive some technical support, and that technical support is most efficiently supplied via that interconnectivity between our community and Roseville, and that right will continue on into the future. Signal standards, I've talked about that. The company will in the future, as the system has moved from analog to digital. It will come as a surprise to no one sitting up there. They have moved forward with their technology. The FCC is expected to adopt in the future, potentially adopt in the future, more robust standards addressing digitally provided cable television signals. And so the company, again, will be obligated to comply with those standards under your contract in the future. I'd like to skip over the next one, Mayor, which deals with franchise fees. I'll come back to that in a second. Just go to the last bullet point here under infrastructure. Cable service connections for city use. That is referring to free cable. Our ability to get cable TV in at City Hall and some other institutional sites for our staff and for other folks that come into those buildings to be able to see our community programming or other public interest programming. We will continue to have that right. We'll get a drop and we'll get at least 3 converters. In other words, 3 reception devices. We'll be able to get the free cable TV service in each location. We'll get it at City Hall, and then 13 other sites, a total of 14 sites, will have the right to that free service. And then returning to franchise fees, I wanted to skip over it because I think it relates to the next topic, PEG access, and generally support, financial support and other support that we're going to get in this community for community programming and other things related to that. The franchise fee bullet point, the 4th bullet point under infrastructure, indicates that we've had in the past the right to received a 5% of gross revenue franchise fee that produces, the staff reports, about just under $500,000 a year, so not an insignificant amount of money. We will continue to have that right under the new contract, but I wanted to highlight, and you have my memo in the packet as well, I wanted to highlight that we'll continue to have that right, but really we're going to have a more robust right to that franchise fee for a couple of reasons. The first is that previously, when you were in the Cable Commission, the Ramsey-Washington Cable Commission, the franchise that was negotiated actually excluded from that concept of gross revenues some revenues that could have been legally included. In other words, some of the revenue sources that the company was collecting that could have been included and a franchise fee would have been payable to you on those revenues wasn't included and now will be included. The most obvious example of that is advertising revenues. So to the extent an advertiser wants Maplewood folks to be able to see their product or their service, they pay the company to have that advertising on the cable system. That revenue will now be included as something that the franchise fee is calculated on. Some other improvements that we've got is that the city will have a more clear and a more robust right to audit the franchise fee payments that you receive, and to the extent you're underpaid, which does happen, let's be clear, there will be an obligation for the company to pay a material amount of interest on those underpayments should they be discovered. And then lastly, and again not insignificantly, you will all appreciate that Comcast bundles together the services that it provides. It provides cable, but also internet and telephone services. Telephone and internet services, those revenues are not subject to the franchise fee that you receive. When they bundle those three services together, they give a discount. How do they allocate that discount? Do they allocate that discount overly to cable revenues, thus reducing your franchise fee, or do they not do that? Well, this franchise will answer that. That discount will have to be fairly allocated among all three revenue sources, and you will not have an over-allocation to cable revenues. So, for all those reasons, I think we believe that the franchise fee obligation will be clearer and better financially for the city. The company, to the extent you want to hear about the company's view on that, the company believes that the broadening of the definition of gross revenues alone will add about $30,000. 2018 over 2019, it would have added about $30,000 in additional franchise fee revenue paid to the city. Moving on then to PEG access, an important topic. I know a topic that the council, when I've been here in the past talking about cable franchising matters, has spent a little bit of time talking about. That was viewed as quite important by staff in our negotiations, and I think we feel good about where we've come out. First off, when you were part of the Cable Commission, under the Cable Commission's franchise, you had a right to a lot of channels. And I mean a lot of channels relative to other communities that have franchises with Comcast. I don't have the number in my head, but I want to say it was 9 or more. 8 channels. Okay, so quite a few channels, and our evaluation was, as you withdrew from the Cable Commission, that was quite a bit more channel capacity than this city alone would ever utilize. And I think the sweet spot that you directed staff to find was about 3 channels, and we've successfully negotiated for 3 channels for your use for community programming. Of course, by using in the future only 3 channels in Maplewood, we've freed up some capacity on the cable system. And as in recognition of that, because of that, the company also agreed to give us those 3 channels in a way that allows you, should you want to put your community programming out in high definition. In other words, 2 of your 3 channels in the future, you'll have the right to cablecast both in standard definition, which has been the way it's been done in the past, but also in clearer, crisper, high definition in the future. And those channels will be simulcast. So if a subscriber only is an SD, standard definition customer, they will still be able to get your community programming channels even though they're available also in high definition. In addition, your PEG channels, your 3 PEG channels will be viewable, will be findable, searchable on the on-screen menu or on-screen guide, just like a commercial channel, just like any other channel. So folks will be able to use their remote and go and find your programming. Maplewood Community PEG programming will be searchable just like other channels. And then as far as money, as far as support goes, that obviously was a topic that the council devoted some attention to. The goal, I think, as we understood it, was that the city wanted to see some relief, some reduction in the amount that customers were paying for support for community programming. The amount that's been paid in the past was $3.94 per customer per month. There was a view that that might be a bit rich, a bit high for this community, but you also wanted to make sure that you were not going to underfund community programming and clip the wings of community programming for your community. We've come up with a solution that has the company paying 2% of its gross revenues in support of community programming, equipment, and capital. That equates to, as the memo indicates, about, on a typical customer's bill, that equates to about $1.94 per month. That depends a little bit on the amount of that customer's bill. If you're a very high user of cable TV services, your cable bill may exceed $100. You can get your bill up to $160, maybe a little bit more. And in that case, you would be paying more because the percent of gross revenues calculation turns on how much you as an individual customer are contributing toward those revenues. You'll be paying a bit more than that if you're a real high user of cable, and you'll be paying less than that if you're a relatively low user buyer of cable TV services. And I would say that I think we view that change, the change from a per customer per month fixed amount to an amount that varies depending on how much cable TV you buy, we view that as a positive. We view that as a good thing because, of course, looking backwards, if I'm a low user of cable, I only get basic cable and I only pay $50 a month, that $3.94 that I'm paying is quite a bit more as a percentage of my cable bill than somebody who's got $160 of cable services. And so tying those concepts together, we believed was going to be a good thing. And again, I mentioned, whether it matters to you or not, I'm not sure, but I mentioned comparing how we've negotiated this deal to other franchises. I will tell you that the 2% of gross revenues arrangement is not uncommon. There are a number of renewals that have been completed that come in around that amount. I will say that the percentage of gross as opposed to a fixed amount is a little bit unique and we think positive, but around that nucleus of numbers is where several of the recent renewals have come in. And then lastly, other notable terms or items. The term, this is a 10-year contract we're proposing, and that is the going number these days. It used to be that cities would like to see shorter contracts. We wanted to get the cable operator in more often if we could, and the cable operators all wanted 15 years. They wanted the longest possible. They didn't want to have to come back and see you again. So cities were often looking for 5 years, cable companies looking for 15, and what do you know, we ended up at 10 years in a lot of these renewals now. And then lastly, not an insignificant point, because of course you have issued a competitive franchise to CenturyLink. They are not engaging quite as actively as we might have hoped, but you have done this in the past, and this contract going forward will, as it must, be non-exclusive, and you'll have the right to consider other franchise applicants in the future. So that's a high-level overview. Obviously, this is a fairly lengthy contract, fairly lengthy document. There's more to say, but these are the high points, and this correlates to what you saw as priorities. So I will stop and let you quiz me.
Thank you, Mr. Vos, and thank you, Mr. Folds. I have to say that I am extremely pleased. This is something, council members, that I've been working on for years. I think that this is a very impressive contract for our community, and that's really what matters. One of the goals that I had set, and former Mayor Slawick was a champion of this as well, was that when we decided that we were going to do this on our own because we thought we could do it better and provide better service to our community, we really wanted to reduce that PEG fee, and we had a goal of $1 per month, and you have exceeded that, which is pretty phenomenal, I think, for our community. I also like some of the other features that you were able to include. 10 years, you know, from our perspective, it's kind of nice that we'll have something solid now for the next 10 years. But I'm thrilled with this. I think that this is really a great thing for our community, and I like it that we are helping to save people money. I do have one question, and then I'm going to open it up to any questions from the council. I also wanted the senior discount, and I understand that they're phasing that out. They had it in some locations, not in others, and I understand that, and that's part of the compromise of a negotiation. This idea that this program that's available for veterans and seniors and families utilizing subsidized lunches, where they can get cable television for less than $10 a month. How is it that that is being advertised? Because I think that that is a great resource for our community, and I wonder if our schools are really well aware of that. Do you have any information about? I can't imagine that they put that up on billboards out there, and that they're really, advertising it a lot, but I think that we should be advertising it and letting people know, because that connectivity is so important. And, it's so important for seniors who are living, and it's a great way for them to stay in touch. It's great for kids who are going to school, for people who are looking for jobs. So how do
Sure.
they advertise that, and what can we do to kind of spotlight that?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, it's a good question. I will say, because I am not an Internet Essentials expert, that I needed, because I thought that might be a question tonight, I went and did a little digging on the Comcast website, and it was quite easy to locate it.
Oh.
I don't think that gets quite to your question, but it's not, if a person was motivated to find out what Comcast provides, what person can do that. Of course, you have to have internet connectivity to do it.
Or you have
or
to
you can go
have
to a
a
library.
monthly newsletter that goes out to our community that, did you know that if you qualify, you are eligible for this type of wonderful benefit? Mr. Folds, what can you tell us?
Mayor and council, exactly that. As a matter of fact, they have, we've reached out to them in the past, and not too long ago, actually, but they can provide, you can sign up as a partner with Comcast for that, and they can provide you with verbiage that you can, and essentially an ad that you can run in your publications and pamphlets. They have a whole program that you can kind of sign up for to promote internet essentials, and so that's.
Can you get in touch, since we have our own communications department, this is perfect for us to get this out to our community, to let people know that this is a resource for them. So,
Certainly, absolutely, Mayor and Council, definitely.
thank you. Anyone else have any comments or questions?
I have a
You know?
I have a comment.
Oh, City Manager Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. I just want to be transparent in this Comcast new contract with them. This does come at a loss in revenue for us, about $140,000, give or take, depending on where we land with the franchise payments. So it will take a hit to our budget, and we will be working through that as we get into the next budget cycle. But I did want you to all be aware that the numbers aren't going up, they're going down, but we're going in the direction that we were given.
Okay. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you. I agree. This, despite the decrease in revenue, I do feel like this is a very good deal for us. I do think, though, as a council and as a staff, we need to look long-term. And cable television revenues are not going to increase in the future. And as a source of revenue, I don't think this is something we should rely on as a consistent source of revenue in the long term. I think I'm not a futurist and I'm not a cable TV industry expert, but I'm pretty confident saying it will be less 5 years or 10 years from now than it is now, if not nearly gone. And so, as we look at this, I think we have to plan for that, especially as we're moving to this percentage process and things like that. So that said, and then the other thing, which is highly related to this, is I do think we need to continue to keep our foot on the pedal of improving our internet infrastructure and finding more opportunities for us to partner with folks like Comcast and CenturyLink and other partners to increase the breadth of service offerings. I was frankly shocked when I moved to South Maplewood last year, the lack of options down there in even a newer part of the city. Moving from Lake Phalen to South Maplewood, I had more options in Lake Phalen than I do in South Maplewood. And so I just want to make sure that we are continuing to keep our eye on the ball with that. And I realize that's outside of a franchise agreement, but I think it's related as this industry declines.
Mayor and Council,
Mr.
if I will look to Finance Director Paulseth a little bit on some of the projections that she's put together, but I know that we have accounted for a likely decrease in that revenue over the next 10 years, and so I don't know what that is, but we are having that conversation and we do anticipate a reduction. As far as the coverage goes, you're absolutely right. One of the things that I think the council did approve, though, is a small cell ordinance, which is likely going to play a part in getting additional, 5G coverage to certain areas of the community. That's where I think you'll be able to see probably some improvement other than maybe new providers necessarily. But we are taking the step to allow for new technologies to be implemented in the city, so.
Quick reader. Yeah, and I didn't mean new
Councilmember
providers.
Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. I didn't mean new providers as much as I did mean making sure that we're keeping pace with technology and maintaining competitiveness. If there are two providers, making sure that both providers are able to provide similarly performing services.
Thank you. I think that those are very good points. In terms of the future, no one can predict the future. But I think that that is something that we have all recognized, that the future is not in cable television. The future is something very different that probably none of us in this room can even imagine in terms of the technology and what the internet is really going to be like in 10 years. But thank you that you are working with Finance Director Paulseth to kind of keep that in mind so that we can make those kinds of adjustments as we move forward in terms of our communication department. And I think that we certainly are more nimble than cable commissions in terms of their revenues. And I think that we will keep the eye on the ball, as it were, so that we can anticipate. But this was a very good report, and it's really nice to see this coming to conclusion after all of this time. And, the goal was really to right-size this for our community, and I think that you've done an admirable job with that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
So next, we have the NFP Employee Benefit Update. Ms. Rameau, this is yours.
Good evening. Thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council members. NFP, our benefits consultant for health and dental insurance, will be presenting information and an historical overview of the city's health insurance plan, as well as go over the upcoming formal competitive bidding process for this fall, which the city is required to do every 5 years in accordance with state statute. It has been a while since NFP has been before the council, and since we have a couple new council members since the last time, we thought this would be a good opportunity to bring them back again. The city has had an outstanding relationship with NFP since fall of 2004. I have personally had the pleasure of working with NFP since that time also. They have proven to be very responsive, professional, and have provided excellent customer service to the city. They have also helped provide the city with ongoing support and assistance to our Wellness Committee and our Work on Wellness program. Tonight, Mr. Jim Sarch and Ms. Ann Benson will be providing a PowerPoint presentation, of which some of the information was in your packet, and will also answer any questions that you may have. However, there were a couple changes to the information, so I have distributed an updated presentation in its entirety in front of you for your reference. And at this time, I would like to introduce Mr. Jim Sarch and Ms. Ann Benson from NFP. Jim, welcome.
Good evening and welcome to our workshop.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of you here, and look forward to answering any questions you may have. Again, as Terry mentioned, I am the Managing Director for NFP. We work on the benefits for the city. I've been able to be working with the city for all those years, and it's been awesome. Your city's great, and the wellness and everything the city has done has helped so much. I'll walk through some of the claim information of what that impact has been from the commitment from the council members back to the staff and how that works from that perspective. So
Can you please state your name?
All good. Used to
Pause
everything.
for the Silverado commercial.
Yes.
Okay.
Commercial was coming through. No.
Can you please state your name so that we have
Yep.
that?
My name is Jim Sarch, and I'm one of the managing directors with NFP.
Thank you.
Yep. So having said that, who NFP is, and actually to kind of give you a little bit of history of that, we were actually started in 1983 as Financial Concepts. So Back in the day, we were Financial Concepts when we were working with the city. We did a rebrand with NFP about 2000, and really took on the name as NFP about 3 years ago when the total rebrand came from Financial Concepts to NFP. So having said that, we are still a local organization. We're actually housed in Plymouth, and our corporate is out of New York, but I think we're a little bit unique in the marketplaces. We kind of bring that local hometown feel to the many cities we work with, which I'll give you a quick synopsis of that. But also really work with the staff, and I think with Ann as here in my background, and she has done a lot of personal things with the staff, and when you see the end of it, what NFP means, I think you'll really connect the dots on how we think we're very different and why we've been able to be with the city for so long as an organization, and really our niche is, our largest sector is the government sector. So we work with many cities. We also work with Washington County and Chisago County, et cetera. But we work with over 40 cities, these being some of the larger ones, but not all encompassing all of them. But so we have a division that works on the large cities and a division that works on cities that are smaller. When we say smaller, is governed by the ACA, which is the Affordable Care Act, which is any city under 50 employees, and then is considered small. Anything over 50 employees is considered large, which obviously the city of Maplewood is that. So you can see some of your sister cities up there. And again, our longest city that we started with is actually up there is City Brooklyn Park. We started with them in 1983, or not in 1983, in 1989, have been a client of ours ever since. So. And we've grown the city business block from that. We are very committed to working with the cities, and really it comes to our promise and what we try to do from an organizational standpoint to not only work on the designs and everything. And it used to be, for those that been in the business world, is we used to really say that we were brokers, and really that brokering part, which is a very important component, has become such a small sliver. The brokering part really comes when it's negotiating the deals, which is very important, which you're going to see what we've been able to accomplish over the years. But there's so much more that we provide now to organizations and to cities from that perspective. So we really have what you want to say is a deep bench of all the different players that work with it. So myself as one of the managing directors, Ann Benson as our senior account executive, the day-to-day that works with Terry. We also have Rachel Blue Dog that works as an account manager. We have Terry Earhart is our well-being consultant that works with your well-being team. And then also the little hubs below that. So we have a communication person that's worked with the city, where we're actually at one point had an HR connection site that helped with some of the communication as the city was bringing more robust things from a communication. We have actuaries that we have on our team that help us to, when we interpret renewals, to actually have our own independent actuaries that are not housed with Medica or Health Partners or Preferred One or anything, to say, okay, what are these numbers supposed to actually be, and this is what they should be, so we can negotiate that broker function at that point in time. I'll tell you what, the compliance has been totally different than it has in many years, ever since the Affordable Care Act has come into play. So there's many things that the city has to be compliant with, which they rely us on as NFP. So we have a whole compliance division that is constantly working with the city to make sure their HIPAA policies and manuals are updated, that they're adhering to the Affordable Care Act, et cetera. And in addition to that, we also have our local attorneys we work with too. So Scott Wold and from Heitzman & Wold is one of our local attorneys. Is that anytime we need a call on anything that comes up with the city, we can go to them too. And then we have a whole technology team. So you can see as the broker function has changed so dramatically over the years. What also we adhere to is a game plan year in and year out. So we have touch points that we work with the city of Maplewood, and it's really based off of a kind of a quarter events, but we have what's called a post-implementation meeting, a semi, a renewal, and then enrollment and end of the year. And so each one of those touch points has different things that happen with it. So right now we just got through what was the post-implementation meeting. So your plan, the health insurance plan, renews on January 1, so it's a calendar year renewal. But throughout that calendar year, so after the post-renewal, we get together with with Mike and Terry and go through, here's what exactly happened with the renewal process, open enrollment, make sure all the i's were dotted, the t's were crossed, so we're all good going into the 2019 year. In addition to that, we update any claims information, which I'll walk briefly through you to show you where your claims are running as a city. And then based off that, then we have another touch point. We come out in quarter 2, which is called the semi-annual. And that's when we're really kind of dig in deeper because we're starting to get closer to that renewal. And typically we get that renewal around that, end of August, first part of September, et cetera, to say, okay, we're starting to forecast forward. Here's where we anticipate based off of where the claims are right now, because there'll be some more claims that'll come in, where we're projecting that renewal to come out at that point in time based off a lot of our data points. We also have a technology that we use that takes some of the claims information. It's de-identified, so it doesn't go down to the individual level, but gives us information that we can take from that database to say, here's what we're anticipating for the claims to be coming up and what we can anticipate based off of our field underwriting and our actuaries where we think that renewal is going to fall. Then we have the renewal meeting, which we meet with the city, go through the renewal meeting, and then we work with the insurance committee too. So you have an insurance committee that's represented by the different union groups, and then we work with them to make sure they're educated, understanding what's happening with the renewal so they can go back to their unions and give that information. And then at the end of the year, which is still a very important time, is to communicate this information, working with Terry and giving that information to the employees in different formats. Last few years, we've been doing more of a, not so much formal presentations in front of the employees, more of a benefits fair, so giving them opportunities to talk with different carriers that come in, et cetera, and understanding their benefits. So again, we're trying to make sure it gets to the level so they understand, because they're the end users that really impact the plan when it comes renewal time. So having said that, as the broker, as you can see all the different things we do, but as that broker function, which still is a very important function, is the negotiation of the deals. And so every year, we are working with our actuaries to say, okay, what is the renewal we're looking at? What's the final renewal? So as you look at the actual columns there, so there's the proposed renewal. So the proposed renewal says, okay, this is what's released by the insurance company. So if you didn't have anyone working on your behalf, this would be exactly what you would receive as the city. The next column over where the percentage is in the middle, so let's just take 2005, it says it's 18.7. Then through either negotiations or plan designs or a combination of both, we were able to reduce that renewal to 9.5%. The actual adjustment to the overall, what you would have paid to the insurance company, actually reduced to $118,431. You take that down to the bottom line. On average, your proposed renewals have come in at 13.9% if you look at that light green area towards the bottom. Your average negotiated renewals have come in at 5.9. On average, that's about $131,000. Overall, we are approaching over $2 million that the city did not have to pay, either you as the city or your employees, which is a substantial dollar amount. And actually, you look at the last, since 2016, average increases in the world out there, and if you can talk to, we work with many cities, but also in the private sector, the average is about 7 to 9%. So we're well below that average trend line out there in the marketplace with a lot of ones that hit the double digits. So again, that's to us the financial impact of working with NFP over those years, besides all the other things that we bring to the city with the communication and adhering to the technology, et cetera. Any questions on that page? That one gets a little detailed, so I want to make sure. Excellent. The next page is the fun part. Hard part for us, but fun that as Terry mentioned, every 5 years, we go through what's called a formal RFP. We can go earlier than that, but a lot of times we negotiate multi-year agreements with the insurance company. So what does a multi-year agreement means? That we're going to have rate caps added in when these formal RFP happen. So for example, this is for the renewal of 1/1/2020. So when that renewal, or when that RFP is processed, we'll ask for 2021 and not to exceed, maybe it's 9%. 2022, it's at 10%. What does that mean? That if for some reason the claims got really bad and you were calling for an 18%, the renewal could never go higher than that 9%. So it's kind of that ceiling is the worst case. So we like to always put that protection in there when we're negotiating these deals with the insurance companies. And then basically what this does is drives out through a timeline that gets us to the finish line. And we work with Terry and Mike and the insurance committee as we go throughout the year. And again, we bid out all the insurance companies. We're not an insurance company. We work for this on behalf of the city. So we're licensed with the United Healthcares, the Medicas, the preferred ones, the Blue Cross Blue Shields, the new ones, which is the Aetna Allinas, and all those. So we look at everything besides the co-ops themselves and see what brings the best deal to the city and to the employees, to the end user from that standpoint. So again, not to get into the weeds of this, but this gives you the details of how we kind of manage throughout the whole process with your team here at the city. So from a claims situation, which I think is important as council members to see, what is the impact, or how much is, you're paying as a premium, but also what is the usage of the plan itself. And the awesome part of it is you ran really well. So again, as we get into this renewal process and RFP process, you're very attractive to the marketplace, which is really good news. And what do I mean by that? So if you look in the upper left-hand quadrant, it says premium versus claims. So premium, just think of that as, I always look at it as like a business. That's the revenue that comes into the insurance company to say, okay, based off of this amount of dollars, how much are the expenses they're going to pay out, and what's that ratio? And the expenses are the claims. That's the utilization of any employee or any member on the plan. This is not just the employees, this is the spouses and children on the plan. If going in to see the doctor, into the hospital, prescriptions, whatever that is, what is that ratio? So you can see the premium has been a little over $2 million. Under that is the claims at the 1.3, the 1.4, and then there's a time period for 2018, February to January. These time periods are important. What do they mean to you when you look at it? The June to May is actually the renewal cycle. So the first two time periods, the June through May of 2017 and the May of 2017 through June 2018, those are the cutoff. So when they do their renewal, they look at those claims for that 12-month period. So it's always a look back when they look at renewal. So they're always looking historically, what's the 12 months, and then they project forward, what's the renewal going to be going forward. Right below that are what we call loss ratios, and all that is taking the premium into claims. So you can see that you ran at a 64, at a 68, and then the most recent 12-month period. So this is a rolling 12 months. So it's taking from February to January of 2019. You're running at 56%. So initially you say, gosh, that's excellent if I'm running a business. Well, what happens is that you have to add on our additional fees. And the fees that are added on is the ACA, the Affordable Care Act fees. There's some pooling charges, a protection, so that if the city is ever hit within one individual having having $1 million claim, you as a city don't pay that full $1 million. There's a point for what we call a pooling point. So once you hit this specific dollar amount, the rest hits the reinsurance, which is the insurance company. So you're protected against devastating claims. And we have seen $1 million claims out there. That is not unheard of anymore in the marketplace. So again, as a city, you're protected. So if I took all the expenses and add it together, typically that's about 20 to 25%. So I would like to see your plan typically run around 70 to 75%. If you run at that loss ratio, means you're probably going to be close to, you'll see the insurance companies release that trend around that 7 to 9%. You're below that, which is what I'm saying is really good news heading into a formal RFP year. To the right of that, in the upper right-hand corner, the blue cylinders, those are what we call your member months. Everything in the insurance world is based off of per member per month. So if I have myself, I'm the only one on your plan, over the next 12 months, it's called 12 member months. If it's myself and my spouse, there's 24 member months. If it's myself and my children, et cetera. So that 3,966 for the February through January of 2019, that's all the members throughout that 12-month period. So if you divided that out by 12 months, that would tell you how many members are on your plan each month. And it'll fluctuate because some members may, come off. You might have some new hires come on, et cetera, from that, so that can fluctuate. But that gives you for that 12-month period. And why is that important? Is that we take those member months, divide it by your claims, and right below that, the orange cylinders gives you a per member per month cost to the actual claims. So that $312 is the average cost per member per month. Obviously, not every member uses the plan, but the insurance companies look at that number. And if that number is under 400, that's a good number too. So that gives you kind of some benchmarks to look at when you're looking at the claims from that perspective. The next page, just what we do is we get a little bit different. We slice it a little bit more. And all this is slicing and showing from the physician side, the pharmacy, the inpatient, the outpatient, and then down at the lower bottom to the far right, the PMPM. Again, that's the per member. It shows you for each one of those categories. So I'm not going to get into detail of each one of those, but it gives you kind of that breakout. We take a large look at it from top down at 30,000 feet, and then we start really slicing the data. Then there's a lot of other reports that we go through with Terry and Mike, et cetera, drill into the claims. But again, as you can see, each time period it compares. Okay, how did the physician go? We're at 125 versus 131 versus the renewal. $70 at a pharmacy PMPM. So those are all those different categories that we watch as we go forward from a claims utilization focus. So again, the great news is the city is running awesome on the claims to premium things. So for those that, I love finishing with this slide because we are different in the marketplaces. We're not your typical corporate one, and I always say, how many times people have Googled, where's NFP? I don't really see the NFP as a total, corporate name, and we rebranded about 2 years ago. It used to stand for National Financial Partners, that big corporation kind of name and everything. That's not who we are. We went out and interviewed our employees. We interviewed our clients out there, say, why do you work with us? And these are the things that resonated for each one of those. And the nimble is pretty easy. What that means is we want to adapt and change to what's happening in the marketplace, to work with our clients, with our cities, and say, what is the next thing that we need to be looking at? What's happening in the insurance world? Make sure the employees understand that when they're looking at their benefits. Fantastic results. I'll take us hands down to anyone out there. We are a results-driven organization. If we have a member on the plan that's having issues with the insurance company, they're calling Ann. We're getting on that phone and we're getting that taken care of. And that's huge for those members because it's tough enough to be having to deal with claims when you can't get the darn insurance companies to take care of it. We take care of it for them and help them. And that's the ultimate, because that's the P. It's personal. The reason we've been able to work with the city of Maplewood for those years and all these cities is we do take it personal. We have established our relationships with the employees to make sure they're taking to the staff, to make sure they understand, and taking the time today to make sure you get a breath of what is happening out there when we're working. I know it's not all inclusive, all that we do, but gives you a good high level of what it means to us to be an NFP member of the city of Maplewood. So. Mayor and council members, anyone have open
Thank
for
you, Mr.
questions or
Sarich.
anything?
That was a very good presentation. Mr. Knutson has a question. Councilmember Knutson.
Thank you, Mayor.
Sure.
This is very impressive. One of the things I'm thinking of is look at this, when you look at claims to premium ratio from the insurance companies that you're going to be receiving bids from. Do you know what their medical loss ratio is overall?
Oh,
I mean, the ACA requires.
The 85% thing. So
Yeah.
I think the only one I saw, I think it's Blues, and I'm not sure if Health Partners did have to pay back on the MLR. So if they go over that MLR, they have to, pay that. But most of them, because of the being a status as a nonprofit in the state of Minnesota, remember that just changed the last 2 years. So they've had to have their margins with between, that under the 2%. So locally, typically, we don't see the Health Partners or the Medicasm have to do hit the MLRs.
Well, this ratio of the 55% is really impressive. So, I mean,
It's awesome.
Maplewood must garner exceptional benefit as a result of that.
Yes, and
Regardless of their medical loss ratio, this is an exceptional loss ratio.
for sure. And I can tell you that's by hands down, as a city, we use the city on their wellness, have one of the best wellness programs out there. Medica ranks you as the #1 wellness program when they talk about it, of what you've committed over the years. And that has resonated within, I think, definitely with the claims and when it's time to market the plans over the years too. And why the Medicas, when they've been with you, time and time have we've seen the decrease in that. Typically, even you don't see that. That's awesome. So, because remember, you're not 100% credible too. So you are. What I mean by that is you kind of live and breathe by your own claims. You also are pooled in with Medica's overall block. They call that community. So there's a percentage. Again, you have to be balanced out there. So the good news about the community is it takes you away from when you're really running hot. So you don't get the high increases, but versus you don't get the lowest in ones. But we always negotiate the low ones, and then we say, okay, we don't want the highest one, we'll take this. So we're always playing a little bit with the insurance companies too.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You know, from my perspective, this just really confirms how important a wellness program is because we see the results. It saves money on our premiums. You know, the last couple of years that I've been on the council, when I see these either zero increases or very little increases, it is really unheard of.
I agree.
And we're obviously doing something right, and we're committed to it. I think it really shows in results. So thank you very much. Anyone, any other questions? Councilmember Juniman.
Actually, it's not a question, but it's a comment off of what you said. That goes to the step of thanking our HR people and our employees who have
For sure.
hopped on the bandwagon and are willing to be part of this whole piece. Because some groups, you can talk to them about this and they wouldn't buy into it. And it's a combination of our wellness program and the people who put it out there, but it's also the people participating. So I think we should thank our employees as well for being willing to be part of it.
Definitely, that is a good point, and thank you, Ms. Rameau and Mr. Funk, who isn't here tonight, but thank you very much for all of your efforts as well, because I know you're leading the charge on this. Councilmember Knudsen.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Just a comment, I belong to this organization and at the Carlson Business School in the MBA program called the Medical Industry Leadership Institute. This morning I was at a meeting and we were discussing, you know, the state of the health economy and so forth. And somebody asked me, so what's it like to be on a Maplewood City Council? And I said, well, it's kind of fun being on this side of the podium as opposed to that from years ago when I had to present. But the point I was making is that one of the things that impressed me are things like this program because, you know, it's not really just the wellness program. It's really people understand and look at things you pay attention to. So if leadership and managers and others are paying attention to this dynamic, it makes a difference. Mm-hmm. So when asked by this executive group, I said, City of Maplewood is doing it right.
Totally agree.
Ms. Rameau, did you want to have any closing remarks?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council. Once again, I want to thank Jim Sarch and Ann for being here for NFP. They're worth their weight in gold. They absolutely are. And they've been my right hand, especially during some challenging years here at the city. And things just were kind of thrown in my lap, and they were right there to help. No problems, no bumps in the road, so I really appreciate all their efforts. And I just wanted to say that as far as the wellness program, yes, probably when the wellness program first started, maybe 2010, 2009, 2010, at that time we were able to determine from claims that there was about 21 to 23% of the employees were getting their annual preventive care. Only 21 to 23. Now, it's more like about 75 to 78% of the employees are going in for their preventive care. That's when you catch those small things before they become large things. So the wellness program has really helped towards the claims renewal. Yes, I agree. But thank you again.
Thank you very much. Okay, the Rush Line update.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you don't have to hand it to me. It's pretty
Steve
loud.
Love, do you want to tee this up, please?
Absolutely, Mayor and Council. So tonight we're joined here by members of the Rush Line project team. We have Andy Getzloff here with Ramsey County. He'll be doing a presentation, and I believe he's going to go over a little bit of history for our new council members about the project, as well as where we're going today.
Welcome, Mr. Getzloff. It's good
Welcome.
to see you again.
Yes, great to see you as well, Mayor, Council. It's great to be back. As Steve said, just wanted to use tonight to provide an update on where the project is at right now. There's always a lot of moving parts with projects like this, so it's a good point to take a pause and hear input from council and then go back and make any adjustments. if needed. I will note that with me tonight is Jeannie Witzig. She is the consultant project manager with her area of expertise in environmental in particular. So have her with as well for an opportunity to dialogue with you and answer questions as needed. Is it over here to point? Okay. So a couple of things that wanted to hone in on the project was just cover a brief overview of the project history and description to bring everybody up to the same speed and same page on it. And then some particular focus areas that as our staff and city staff have been looking at in greater detail over the last 6 months or so, namely the rail authority right-of-way, which is where the corridor would be shared with Bruce Ventle Trail, Weaver Elementary School, which is adjacent to the corridor, the Highway 36 station, which is sort of halfway between the Gladstone area and the Maplewood Mall area, and North End coordination, which I know we've touched on in past presentations about our efforts to partner with the city, and then a few things about what's in the hopper, what's coming up over the next few months that the city should be aware of. Not to take you back too far, but just starting with Rush Line's a little bit of history here. This has been a transportation corridor since the 1890s. One of the first lines connecting St. Paul up to Duluth, and this is really important information, particularly when we're out there talking to people and doing cultural and historic resource inventory. That this being a former rail corridor provides significance as itself that we'll have to be mindful of as the project moves forward. Moving forward 100 years to the 1990s is when the county purchased the former corridor from the railroads, preserving it for future transit. And since then, there's been a number of different feasibility and alternatives analysis studies to determine what is the appropriate routing, what's the appropriate type of transit. Most recent one completed was in 2017 with the pre-project development study, and that identified a bus rapid transit route for the corridor, which I'll have a graphic of in a moment. And that route and general station locations and type of transit was endorsed by the 5 cities that are along that line in Ramsey County. So this is the map of what we call the locally preferred alternative, the preferred route and mode. A couple things unique overall, it's 14 miles long, 21 stations. There's approximately 100,000 jobs within a half-mile walk of stations and 100,000 people as well. 20% of the households in this corridor do not own a vehicle, so this is not only provides a choice, but it provides an option, in particular, to commute back and forth to jobs and education, which are the highest destinations for transit use. As far as corridor routing goes, there are five stops within Maplewood. Overall, we call this dedicated guideway BRT. Dedicated means that it travels within its own roadway or with its own lane, and I'll show an image of this in a moment of what BRT is. So the corridor itself, generally, it leaves downtown St. Paul, Union Depot. For those of you who are familiar with the Gold Line project, 2 of those stations, the Union Depot and the 5th and 6th, would be shared with the Gold Line project, so an opportunity for that project to build stations that this project serves. Travels up along Robert Street, connecting what is essentially a medical corridor and with Regents Hospital and Gillette, and then a connection to the Green Line near the Capitol, and then follows Phelan Boulevard, additional clinics that are there by health partners as well, and then through the east side along Phelan Boulevard, and then up along, which would essentially be the shared corridor with the Bruce Ventle Trail, and up through Maplewood. Stops would be at Larpenteur. The stop is right at the border with St. Paul, the Gladstone area near Frost Avenue, the Highway 36 station, and then 2 in the North End area, which is pretty exciting. One at the St. John's Hospital and the other at the existing Maplewood Mall Transit Center. And then to the north of there, this is where the corridor would traverse over 694 and follows Highway 61. And you get dedicated lanes by using the outside lanes on 61 with an ultimate endpoint in downtown White Bear Lake. So how does Rush Line fit into the overall system? It's a question we often get asked. This is a recent graphic from Metro Transit showing that with the addition of, on the right here is Rush Line in the upper right-hand corner, and then even Gold Line, a significant as well on this map. These are really the two high-frequency transit lines that are planned for this area of the region. So not just about connecting the jobs in this corridor, but it starts to open up jobs and employment throughout the market, and also starts to open up connections that other people from other areas of the corridor can make to get into the northeast market. And from a transit perspective, it's these frequent all-day services. So Rush Line would be all day throughout the day, every 10 to 15 minutes. It's that frequent all-day service that is generating the highest demand from the market, from transit users out there, and expected to be the highest area of growth into the future. Bus rapid transit, a couple quick facts about what it is. It is is a similar service to a light rail. The one difference would be you're running a bus versus a 3-car train, so your stations and your vehicles are much more scaled to the context that they serve. A couple of things with the BRT vehicles themselves. We are working towards an all-electric fleet on this corridor, so I think that's going to be a reality by the time the Rush Line buses are up and running. And a couple other features too. Stations themselves are more pronounced. Fare payment and collection happens at the station, so the boarding process becomes rapid. That's a big part of that bus rapid transit piece, as well as real-time signage announcing the next bus arrival, and things like bike racks or bike lockers and such. Example of what a station could look like. This is from the Orange Line, which is another corridor being planned out to Burnsville. Wouldn't look exactly the same in Maplewood. Would have some unique Metro Transit brand elements, because even though Ramsey County is leading this now, this will ultimately be a Metro Transit service that's in operation. So you can see some of those elements there, the shelter facility, the fare payment and fare validation devices, in this case, the dedicated lane that's just there for transit as well. And what that dedicated lane allows you to do is the bus becomes much more reliable service, doesn't get stuck in traffic, and improve the overall performance. And that dedicated feature has also been something that helps with that placemaking ability, and ability that, depending on the station and location, can be a catalyst for economic development activities as well. So where we are in the process, I mentioned that last study, the pre-project development, the locally preferred alternative was identified. We're now in the environmental analysis phase. It says 2 years up there, but by the time we're said and done, it's going to be closer to 3 years to get through the necessary steps. A couple of the key things that we're doing is we're preparing an environmental assessment that's under both federal and state regulations. So there's certain steps we need to make and need to go in sequential order to get through that process. So we're about almost halfway through that process right now, with the goal of an environmental document late next year at some point. As well as doing environmental work, we need to advance the engineering too. So we've gone from dots on the map to actual station platforms and locations, and we're starting to look at things like stormwater and floodplains and wetlands and natural resources and all those components, as well as traffic and pedestrian connections, all fit into that. Station planning, one of the things we did is we advanced a lot of this station planning up front as part of this phase. So we did a lot of that work last year with a number of different working group committees of citizens and businesses along the line, to make sure that we were putting our stations and our platforms in the right location and avoid redoing work later. One other note to make on here is that although Ramsey County leads these early phases, after this phase we would transition to Met Council, and Met Council becomes the lead, and essentially we become the county is in the driver's seat, as well as, or moves over the passenger seat, and council in the driver's seat. So it's very important that we're following all these steps and making sure that when we hand off the project, it's a smooth transition, and the project's pretty well defined from all the stakeholders and what we all expect to get out of it. Just quickly on organizational structure, Ramsey County is the lead, but there's a number of advisory committees that help to inform the decision making. The lightly shaded purple on the bottom, those are those station planning working groups, which were a little more ad hoc and formal, providing advice along the way about station location, and we expect to go back to those at a point in the process too. We also have a technical advisory committee, staff from the agencies and the cities and the county providing guidance along the way. Steve Love and Michael Martin both serve on that from the city. And we have a community advisory committee that's business and citizen reps from geographically from along the corridor, and a diversity of ages, genders, backgrounds as well represented on there, with I believe 4 or 5 members from the Maplewood community. And they also advise the project, provided input on different elements as they work their way up. And above that's the policy advisory committee, and that's it's elected officials from the cities and counties. Mayor Abrams has taken over the baton on that transition as the PAC rep for Maplewood. But it also, and Victoria Reinhardt is the Ramsey County representative on that. But this also includes business representatives from the chambers and education, as well as some nonprofit representation to make sure that all those perspectives are brought into the decision-making process. So that's the background. Just next, I wanted to jump right into the visioning framework. So this is a task that we're doing specifically for the portion of the corridor where it's co-located with Bruce Ventil Trail. So it's about 6 miles of the overall corridor outlined in yellow there. And what we wanted to do was develop a safe and context-sensitive BRT guideway and shared use plan, develop this collaboratively with technical expertise as well as community input, and use it to help guide decision-making. Our goal also at the end of this is to have a separate document just for that rail corridor, so we really understand that vision. So when things happen, like the project transitions to Met Council, they're aware of, and they have a documentation of what the desire is of the community and the partners to see. We're also not starting from scratch. The last phase of the study, there are binders of documents and comments from people of what they'd like to see out along the trail corridor and concerns that they have, as well as opportunity spots as well. And we're using those to help guide this work. Just to give a perspective of, okay, now we're out on the current Bruce Ventil corridor. I believe this location is just north of Frost Avenue, but I didn't label it, so I won't guarantee that. But generally, the corridor is 100 feet wide. We have a 12-foot wide trail that's in there, and our county parks department mows 12 feet on each side, and the rest of it has just been allowed to grow naturally since the county acquired it 25 years ago. This is just one concept of how BRT and trail can coexist. We are showing in this there's opportunity for buffer between the trail and the guideway, and also buffers between the guideway and trail and surrounding properties. The big question is, what does that look like? What goes on in that space? And not only what do we put there, but how do we maintain it and who maintains it going forward? So that's conversations that we're really starting to kick off now through this visioning framework. And our first step in that was back on March 27th. We brought in our representatives from our different advisory committees and some other key stakeholders like Weaver School mentioned before. And the goal of this was, let's go and try to address some of these key questions. What is important out there? We've been hearing all this input all these years. How do we take that and figure out what's important, what's an overall vision, and what are some design solutions for this corridor? So we did a couple tabletop exercises where people were flagging areas of interest along the corridor to focus more in on. And then we did a design preference exercise. And what that did was, for each of these categories here, trail and BRT separation, what happens between the trail and the guideway. Grade separation is a couple of spots where we're looking at either a trail goes underneath and the guideway goes over, or there's crossings at intersections. Landscaping, the level of landscaping versus natural amenities, stormwater treatment, what that might look like, fencing if needed for safety or security at certain spots, what does that buffer screening look like, what's trail lighting look like, what's the need for wayfinding signage as well, and then trailhead amenities as well. So our county parks department manages Bruce Ventil Trail, so they participate as well and have an interest in potentially adding some more trailhead amenities such as into the future, such as bike fix-it stations or even in parking in certain locations. What have we heard so far from the workshop? And this really reflects, those binders of community input we've gotten to date as well. maintenance is going to be a common concern. If we're going to propose something, we need to know that we've got a plan to maintain it going forward. Context is important, knowing that additional residential input, especially when we get in that micro in our backyard level, to figure out, what's the appropriate treatments in that area. An opportunity to showcase that historic rail nature. There's a lot of people interested in this corridor and ways we can interpret history out there. Preference towards maximizing green space and natural features wherever possible. That's a pretty consistent theme versus more of that landscape formal type setting. And then this desire to maximize permeability and pedestrian access across the corridor. So there's a few locations where there's existing accesses, some are formal, some are informal, ways that we can do that to make crossings where we can permanent, but also safe, which is the last point that was on the list here. So this is a timely update for council. I mentioned that I would call that visioning workshop a soft rollout of our engagement plan. The next step, what we'd like to do primarily in the month of June, is what we're proposing is to have what we're calling Tuesdays on the trail. So 4 different Tuesday evenings, we're going to set up tents at different spots along the corridor, and it's an opportunity to catch people as they're coming by to engage them about the project, but also we're going to advertise this very heavily. And we want to do a specific mailing to the people that are directly adjacent to the corridor, but also going about a block off there. So if you're on one side of the street and you got neighbors on the other side of the street, that there's some information there too. So, and at this visioning session, what we hope to gain out of this is really twofold. That first workshop helped to set our parameters of kind of design solutions that, the ones that are kind of too crazy or too out there, pulling those back, and the ones that are, and sort of what's the realistic bucket. We want to bring those out to the public, get input on what their preference would be. And then we also want to use this as an opportunity to have our plan sets, our most current plan sets out there, so that if a resident wants to talk about, okay, here's my property, here it is, what does it look like? We may not have all the answers right away, but we're at least giving them the point of contact to talk with and giving them what would be the next steps in that process. So with this plan, our goal would be have that document around the fall time frame in a final format to carry on. So that's the visioning framework. The next focus area I want to touch on is Weaver Elementary. Weaver Elementary near County Road C?
Mm-hmm.
B, thank you.
B.
That's why I asked that. We've, from the beginning of this phase, been very cognizant that there's an elementary school that's next to where the Bruce Ventle Trail and the rail right-of-way is, and we wanted to engage and coordinate with them early. So we've met with the superintendent, or not the superintendent, the operations manager for the school district and the principal a few times, talking through, what does it mean to have a BRT out there? How do we engage and talk to others at the school? So since then, we've participated in the Spring Carnival and in Parent Information Night. I'd say for the most part, people are, the biggest concerns we have is the trail going away, and I heard it's going to be light rail. So trail's not going away, and it's going to be bus rapid transit. So a lot of just being there and having these conversations, we're able to address concerns off the bat. We've also been using tools such as visualization to help us show what it could look like. And I've got a couple of those right here as well. So one thing unique about Weaver Elementary is there's a trail that cuts through out to English Street, and it crosses the Bruce Ventle Trail. This is one, proximity to the school, not wanting to cause a conflict point here. The direction has gone to grade separate this one. And we want to show what that could look like. So we put a couple concepts here. The trail goes under, the BRT guideway goes above. There's a natural berm that helps with being able to do this. And Weaver Elementary is in the background. And that's a 45-degree wing wall. This is a view looking directly under that. I'm trying to avoid that kind of tunneling effect as much as we can through this. And then there's another option, which is more of a flat 90-degree wing wall. We've been presenting both out. I think for the most part, people like that softer edge with the 45-degree. But just to give a sense of the scale, that's the sense of the scale of the bus as well as the width of the roadway, the width of the trail. Again, there's another view of that 90-degree. And then since this tool, we haven't used it everywhere, but the areas we have used it can be really effective. The school had asked us, well, what will it look like from the school? So we did the rendering from essentially, this is the edge of the blacktop. This is what you'd see from there with off in the distance the trail and the bridge. We also did a visualization for County Road B intersection, but this could be any number of intersections along the corridor. Again, you'll see that this the bus would be heading southbound at this location. You can see the separated trail, the 2 lanes for the bus, and it looks like a normal signal at any other intersection. The 2 differences are here, that signal is only going to be activated when the bus comes through, or when somebody's using the Bruce Ventil Trail or a pedestrian crossing activates it with a push button. That's another added feature that's put out there. And then the other thing would be signage. This is very similar. U of M's got the bus guideway between the 2 campuses. This is similar to what it looks like. You have the do not enter sign and a no turn sign and busway signage along there. Other than a bus coming by every 10 minutes, it's going to be a pretty quiet type of environment out there. So that's the Weaver update. So the 3 to 4 update areas I wanted to touch on was the Highway 36 station. Again, this station is located just north of Highway 36 off of Jervis. A couple of things that are unique about this area is there are existing jobs and employers in that area and ability to potentially add some more employment type uses in the future. There is also Harvest Parks in the area and the ability to provide access to that park going forward. This is one where our station is pretty well set, but one of the components we are exploring is a park and ride at this location. With its convenient access to 36, it makes a really good location for a park and ride and helps to complement Maplewood Mall, where Maplewood Mall tends to draw more from the north. This is going to draw more from that market over to the east. I'll say right now in the process, we've drawn a circle to be our search area for the station. And working with staff, we've been charged to come up with some real kind of creative solutions to have a park and ride in this location, whether that becomes surface or becomes structured. We don't have any concepts to share here today, but I think a couple of the general themes we're looking at is how we can minimize impacts to existing operations and businesses within that area. And then Harvest Park as well. Anything that's done as part of this should have a net benefit overall to the park. One example of that is potentially adding if we have parking, also making that a trailhead for Bruce Ventil Trail. Our county is interested in doing that as well, and this could provide that synergy and opportunity to provide access to the park, the transit, and the trail network. Probably one last note on here would be we're also aware of the Highway 36 interchange and some challenges with not having signals at that ramp, and we're going to be working to see if we can, with a park and ride demand here, if that's going to push the warrants enough with MnDOT to be able to get that component with signalization included as part of the project too. One thing we are doing near 36 is some more targeted business engagement. We've had a lot of good focus on North End and Gladstone, and there's a number of different employers. They range from office, warehouse, manufacturing to not as much retail in that area. And so what we've done, we've contacted pretty much all of the businesses in there. We've offered one-on-one meetings to follow up, but most have basically just wanted some information about the project and not wanted us to follow up. We did meet with the MnDOT Research Lab, which is in one of those quadrants where we could potentially be using some of their property for the project or even stormwater. And they said they asked us to come on back in June. They do a brown bag lunch at 10:30 a.m. at MnDOT, so I think they start really early over there, to their employees, and they have about 120 employees there. So a very interesting facility if you ever want to learn about a use in your city and some of the testing that they do there. Very important. And even they were mentioning the ability of internship programs and getting people to jobs out there is a challenge, and the benefit that Rushline could provide by filling that gap in need. Fourth and final area to highlight would be just our continued coordination with North End Business, or North End Vision Plan. We've had our pretty much a regular appearance on the Maplewood Business Council, and I do appreciate that breakfast every once in a while. We've been to a few North End working group meetings. Our consultant teams are communicating together really well. We try to piggyback on engagement. I know when Ling Becker was doing some of that business one-on-one engagement, Frank from our office was out there with her talking to people. And we intend to keep doing that going forward. Our consultants right now are even talking about some of the station plan visions and providing some informal comments back to the team to help to strengthen that plan as well. Bottom line, as far as the routing, and I know we've talked about this before, but just to maybe reorient everybody. So the routing changed a little bit since the LPA. And one of the key differences is trying to get the stations at the right spots. We had a station dot on Beam before, which is really back of the house for hospital. So we looked at a number of different options to come up with this concept, which is if you're coming from the south, you're going up the trail corridor, new intersection teeing into Beam, going down to the Maplewood Mall transit station, circulating through there, and then coming back out and taking Hazelwood, which yellow indicates mixed traffic, so no dedicated lanes there, with a stop right at St. John's Boulevard, which is essentially kitty corner to their front entrance to the hospital, the spot where people want to go moving forward. So from what our station planning consultant has said and the cities is these are really two winner locations when it comes to BRT. Next steps, just briefly, some of the engagement activities, we do have an online map that does get pretty frequent and active use. It's a good way to zoom in on different parts of the corridor or leave a comment. We're also, in Maplewood specific, we're going to be at your bicycle rodeo tomorrow, right? Yes, tomorrow night. It is our intern, Heather McDougall. It's her last day as a county intern and last act. So if you're out there, yeah, tell her thanks for us. And then the North End Open House, I know that's coming up on the 29th, and we'll have a presence there as well to answer questions. And then, as mentioned, the Tuesdays on the Trail, we're probably about a week out from any sort of formal kind of invites to that, but good to keep on your radars going forward. And then environmental, I mean, we're continuing to work through to prepare a document. We're preparing what are called 15% design plans. That's really our next touch point with the city. In the August timeframe, we'll send those out to staff, and staff will have an opportunity to circulate those around the different divisions, maybe get some more council input on certain areas or parks input on certain areas, and provide formal feedback back to us. That helps to us to solidify exactly what gets put into this environmental document going forward. So some pretty important touch points. All that works up to the publication of an environmental document sometime in 2020. So still a little bit of ways out on actually getting that document published. But with that, I'll certainly pause at this point and would entertain any questions from Mayor or Council.
Okay. Thank you. That was an excellent presentation. Councilmember Juniman, you have a question?
Thank you, Mayor. Was a very good presentation. Thank you. I think this cannot be overplayed or said often enough or brought up ad nauseum, however you want to look at it. As you know, a great deal of our portion is on the trail, and you know what gnashing of teeth and banging of heads has gone on over having to try and adjust to that, and I think overall neighborhood people have done very well. But I do think that every step of the way, no matter how much you think you've done enough is never enough to try and involve those people. I know it's difficult sometimes to engage people, but I don't think you can over-invite. I think you can under-invite, but I don't think you can over-invite. I do think there are people who totally understand and say, okay, this is the way it was, but, I still run into people who say, but that's the trail. Never mind that it's posted every few feet that this could be a transit way. People get used to something, and the sad part of this is they love this something. So then, the more you love it, the harder it is to part with what you think is going to go completely away. And I think part of it is helping people see, whether it's drawings, whether it's actually something they can put their hands on, a little model, I don't care what you do, but where they can see what's going to be between their yards and the bus. And whatever that turns out to be, I think they deserve input, but I also think you need to be very aware that they are really, really high on the natural value of that, meaning I've heard people say, well, I don't want to drive all the birds away, I don't want to drive all the animals away. And it may not seem important in the grand scheme of things to some people, but it's very important to those people, and we're a very environmental city, so obviously it's very important to us as well. And I do think when you're doing the environmental impact scenario, you might even want to involve the people then as much as you can. What do they see? What do they not want to have go away? What is it that makes that so appealing and this process so difficult? I just don't think we can do too much in that area. And I understand why it's difficult for them, but I've also tried to tell these people that it has to be this way. This is what is, when you're in a metropolitan area and we're trying to actually improve things so we don't have to have our carbon footprint be bigger than the whole United States of America. So there is a reason and people understand it, but it's still very hard to let this go away. And I think if the more you're part of that process, the better it is. And that doesn't mean we're not going to get pushback. I think we are going to. But I also say, I've told people you're going to have a chance. So we have to let them know when the chance is, and you have to let them know over and over and over. And we will do our part. I would presume and put it on our website and so on. But I do think the people that are actually, at this point it's the county, it will ultimately be Metropolitan Council, but the people who are actually doing this project, you just need to be in so much contact with those people that you can feel what they think they're going to lose. And I don't, in my mind, it's not a loss, it's a change. And so I'm trying to let people know that they should try and participate in that change. What is it you want? And if there's something they want that you can't let them have, you need to tell them from the outset and what you're going to do instead so that people have a chance to adjust to it and make other suggestions. Thanks.
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Couple things. One, thank you for all the work you've been doing. I feel like I see a lot of you, and that's because I know you're working hard and showing up everywhere, so that's great. I really like the visuals you guys are starting to pull out. I think that's really critical. If there's one thing I've learned in my career is that describing new and conceptual ideas to folks without a really clear visual, or even worse, a misleading visual is nearly impossible. And I know we've talked about this before in other meetings, but I think the more as this progresses, we could get even to starting to do animations and moving tours, things like that, where people can really start to virtually experience what getting on a bus at a bus rapid transit station looks like. What does walking down the Vento Trail look like in that sort of more immersive environment? I realize that's not free, but it's not as expensive as it used to be either. So I think the more we can do those kinds of things, the better. Quick question for Mr. Love, ballparky. How many cars are there an hour on English? Just ballpark. Put your engineer hat aside and make an estimate.
Mayor and council, I don't have that number. I would say when, I'll turn to Andy here. When we're talking about number of buses on.
That's where I'm going. I just want to have something to compare it to. So
Well,
don't
I
steal
would
my
compare it
thunder.
not even to English. I would compare it to just our standard residential roads. And this is going to see significantly less traffic even to your smaller residential roads.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to guess if you stand on English for 24 hours, you're going to see more than 10,000 cars. Would be my guesstimate. Is that unreasonable?
It might be around that, yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking about 6 buses an hour during regular periods and 12 an hour during rush hour, correct? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's not exactly like we're putting 494 in these people's backyards, right? It is a manageable amount of traffic, ideally electric, and I think, those are the kinds of things through these visualizations I think we can start to bring forward and make realistic about what does that really look like? Because it sounds scary to think you've got, a constant trail of buses in your backyard, which is just not the case. To the routing around the north end. Unfortunately, you and some of your colleagues have taught me enough to be dangerous about transit planning, which means not very much. But the one thing I do remember when we were working through some of the challenges with Gold Line in Woodbury was when we were talking about how to get around the Radio Drive area, was some major concerns around backtracking and the impact that backtracking has on riders and ridership and whatnot. Are there any other options? I mean, one thing I think would be ideal if we could somehow deal with the strip mall that's in the way is if we could come back through those parking lots right to the front door of St. John's and then turn up Hazelwood versus going back to Beam. I realize there's a building in the way, but,
It's not owned by us.
and I realize that too.
Yeah.
But I mean, those kinds of things, like, have we looked at some of those other options? Is there any other options besides backtracking there?
Mayor, Councilmember Smith. Yeah, so that is something that could be looked at as sort of a future piece of this. I think it's, you get it in there on Beam, and then as St. John's, those properties become available, that could be an add-on there to make it more of a loop type environment. I will say that from the mall south, your most time-sensitive trips are going to be those trips, so you're providing that biggest benefit for that part of the corridor. The part to the north is a growing and emerging corridor and more of a throughout the day type. It's not as time sensitive because there's freeway-based routes that can help with that. So yes, it is a time penalty to add distance, but the Maplewood Mall Transit Center, the benefits of that when we've looked at it before with outweigh the travel time impact. And actually from a serving of jobs in particular, when you start to weigh that together and the transfers that can be made at Maplewood Mall Transit Center, the ridership was trending is better if we go to Maplewood Mall overall. So that's usually our good indicator in these things that we're on the right path, making the right decision, if we're seeing a correlated ridership benefit with it.
Good points. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very interested too, as this evolves, as we start to look at autonomous vehicles and the scalability for these systems to start to move that direction. In my day job, we just launched our first autonomous vehicle, and the technology is progressing faster than I think any of us expected it would, and I think it's going to continue to accelerate in a pretty serious way. Are there infrastructure issues or other things that we should be looking futuristically towards to make sure that should a corridor like this lend itself to autonomous vehicles, that we're sort of thinking that through? Because I feel like this sort of thing would be the ideal first place for that, rather than.
I can maybe start with that, and Jeannie, if she has anything to add, can jump from the engineering side. But I think having your dedicated right-of-way is your big part, because you can control the usage of that. And I've also heard about making sure you have the right conduit in place when you do the project. And the other thing too is everybody seems to be talking about autonomous vehicles in different formats and circuits, and that might be something that we often partner with U of M, with either student groups or more bigger kind of research projects, and that could be a future topic that we explore a little bit more about, the potential for autonomous bus vehicles in the future. But Jeannie, did you have anything?
Yeah, I think
Also need a reason to bring Jeannie up here.
Yeah.
The knowledge.
Do you want to state your name, please?
Yes, absolutely. I'm Jeannie Witzig. I'm with Kimley Horn, and we are under contract with Ramsey County for this project. So I'd underscore again what Andy brought up in terms of it is an area that we all are watching within our industry very closely. It affects a lot of projects, but it's emerging. And so the funding for that as well is also a question, as always. Currently, this project would be looking for federal money from the Federal Transit Administration, and so that funding element is something to also watch. But having the project be in that dedicated guideway, the majority of the corridor, really provides the greatest flexibility if there are any types of mode or technology type of changes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Niblett.
Thank you, Mayor. As a resident of County Road B in English, yes, there are about 10,000 cars now, especially since the construction has gone on, going down English Street. I think the concern for me, or the questions for me, is about what Brian talked about and what Councilmember Juniman talked about, having information. When you go down the trail and you're riding and you can't hear anything but nature, that's why you ride down the trail. So to say that there's only going to be 6 buses down there riding with you side by side in an hour, okay, that's cool. But it's going to change it. And you just got to say it's going to change it, you know? I'd be really, really interested in the noise level that the buses are going to cause with the trails, in conjunction with the trails. The other part for me is, what is the division between the trail and the bus line? Because when I'm on the trail, usually there are little kids, families, and are kids going to be able to just run over into the, you know, the area or not? Yeah. And Tuesdays on the trails, I'll look forward to it and try to encourage some of my neighbors because there are lots of questions still. And people, when you don't know, you create something much worse in your head. But it's really, really, like Councilmember Juniman said, you got to over-invite. You really, really do, because people just want to know and want to understand. And I'm not sure that they really do. I'm not sure I really do yet. I have a feeling I will learn. But there's just a lot of questions. And when I look at the rendering of Weaver with the question I had was, I thought that this was going to be kind of like a side-by-side, so where did the trail go if the BRT is there? I didn't see the trail. Do you know what I mean? So when you're doing renderings like that, it's like, what happened to the trail? So, but I know you guys have been working on this a very long time. I know that you're not even close to being where you want to be or where things are going to really, really get going. And I appreciate all the work that you've done. And I know, you know, the more things change, the more things stay the same. But question. The other thing I had a question about was the platforms. Now, the rendering of the platform looked really, really nice, but my thought was, that's a summer view. What happens in the winter? It has been closed. You know, if we're doing it like we've been doing it these past couple of years, it'll be a little long. So that was the only question other than that. But thank you.
And we could briefly
You know,
address those.
I might be able to
four.
actually help on that last one. I was at that visioning event, and in fact, that was me sitting in that picture, and I was looking at myself in there. The detail in which these folks are working, we had really big maps. We talked about what does it look like in the winter. We talked about where does the snow go when there's snow removal. We talked about the landscaping and the fact that if there is a lot of snow that's moved, you can't just move it on the landscaping or it'll kill it. So the detail in which you are encouraging engagement is unlike anything I've ever seen in terms of all of those questions. And they've had those very specific engagements with Weaver School to talk about the concern for the safety of the kids. And I have to say that Mr. Gitzloff has been very responsive to the concerns from our community, and I expect nothing less than that in the future, that there have been modifications, there have been new things that have been brought up. I think Tuesdays on the Trail are going to be great, and I agree with Councilmember Juniman that you can't over-invite on this, and eventually there will be no one in our city that will say, I didn't know about that, because there are so many opportunities and so many touch points. So thank you for this, and thank you for coming and kind of bringing everyone up to speed on it, and we look forward to further engagement.
Mayor,
So,
just one more comment.
okay, Councilmember Juniman.
Thank you. Please, every single time you have a chance, it's bus, not train. I know that sounds strange, but someone just said, well, that darn train going up, just last week. So you can't say bus often enough either.
Yeah. And I really appreciate the fact that you are really focusing on electric buses. I think that that's great. And that's a change that I've seen from my involvement, because that wasn't really necessarily part of the horizon, and now that's really what the focus is. And so this is really an evolving process. I think the more that we can engage our community, the better it's going to be. And I am anxious to see how this all looks in a couple of years. So can you just close out with what is our projected, when is the construction going to start on this?
May 1st, 2024. Hold me to that. And 2026 operating, so that's our projected course going forward.
Are we ever going to be really called the Purple Line?
There is a letter from the former Met Council chair that stated purple letter, so we'll have to talk to the new Met Council chair to make sure that we still have dibs on that color.
Yes.
Oh, you do?
I think she kind of liked purple. Thank you.
Would you address the noise question real quick?
Oh, sure.
That was-
Absolutely, and it's a nice segue from your comment relative to the electric buses. Part of the environmental assessment, we are doing a detailed noise analysis, and we include the type of vehicle. And so we will be assuming an electric bus. As part of that noise analysis, we go out and we do existing noise. We monitor what the noise is out there currently, and we take into consideration if it's a quiet environment or if it's a relatively noisy environment. That's how we assess the impact. So if folks are used to a quiet environment and a project brings in something very noisy, that's reflected in the analysis. So that is a big part of what we're doing. We know that noise is often one of the key areas. So we have really outstanding folks doing that work. And that's something that we are anxious to share with folks when we get those results. Yep.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Folds, our training on the intranet. I'm giving you a hard time because I certainly am not the most technologically advanced council member up here, by a long shot. Mr. Folds knows that.
Mayor and council, thank you. What I'm going to do right now is just very quickly present to you where we're going with the council intranet and communicating items with you. So this stems from a conversation or a project, I think, starting months ago, where you wanted more, a calendar, council calendar updated more frequently, included in the FYI, and now it's included in the packet as well. So we started with that. We started working on the internal processes and how to get those items to the city manager's office, fully knowing that at some point we wanted to move that calendar away from just a static calendar in Outlook and make it online and accessible to you through any number of avenues. And so what we've done is what Mr. Sheeran showed or presented just a couple weeks ago is the city intranet page. And so that's how we communicate with employees. As part of that, we also create department subsites, essentially. And so we've now created a subsite for the city council. And so as you can see on the screen, we haven't had communications make it look good yet. We're still in the process of building it out. But ultimately, what we're trying, the goal in all of this is having a central location where all of your calendar events, all those events would be housed. And then we'd be able to get that to you, or you'd be able to pull those down from any number of ways. The first way is, and what will be coming here this week, is just information and instructions on how to just log into the site. And so it's maplewoodmn.sharepoint.com. Don't worry about writing it down because I'll send it to you. And it's the same username and password that you use to log into your email. And so that is one of the ways for which you can log in and see the calendar live. And so one of the issues we want to, not issues, but one of the challenges we want to address with the static calendar is if there's changes, the council packet's already gone out, you're already looking at an outdated set of events. And so this way, the event that you're looking at on SharePoint is the most up-to-date. The other thing that we want to utilize in this, which will be nice, and I'm guessing that what I would like to do is when we get to that point, set up individual meetings with each of you as needed, because how Councilmember Knudsen wants to pull those items down may be different from Mayor Abrams. And so we can work with you on how you want to do that. Some of the ways, though, like I said, you can go to the site and just log in and view it. You can set alerts for particular pieces of it. So you can set alerts for the calendar, and so that when a calendar item gets updated, changed, you could receive an email update for that. You can subscribe to the RSS feed if you use that. Again, that's a way to get notifications for changes. You can also link the calendar to wherever you keep your personal items as well. And so you can link it to other calendar programs also. So all in an event to keep you more connected to the events as they get posted and as they change. Long term, one of the things and one of the reasons why we chose SharePoint to do this is that it then opens up a bunch of other doors for how we can use that infrastructure. So we have departments using it not just for a calendar, but also for frequently asked questions, managing contacts, any documents that we want to be available. So one of the thoughts that we had, or one of the ideas that staff came up with was, if we had a new council member section and we could have any resources, either videos that the league has put out or things like that, as just a group of resources that a new council member could log into and just go through and view. So there's lots of other ways that we can use it. Currently, we're working on just that calendar piece, but from there, we can use, as creative as we want to get, we can use it. So I will send out an email tomorrow with instructions on how to get to the site and log in. And then from there, we'll likely be setting up individual meetings with you on how to sync your iPads to it and whatnot. So with that, council, I can answer any questions or we can be done. That's all I had. All right.